Blind date was a joke, until Triplet girls walked in, holding a note that said, "Please don't leave." The sleek black car rolled to a stop at the edge of a cracked sidewalk. Daniel Lawrence stepped out, adjusting the cuff of his navy blue shirt as he glanced around the quiet neighborhood. Peeling paint, overgrown yards, and crooked mailboxes lined the block. The house in front of him looked abandoned. Its front lawn was more weeds than grass. The wooden steps creaked just from the wind brushing by, and yet, a single blooming rosebush stood defiantly near the porch, its petals bright against the decay. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and read the handwritten address again. "This is the blind date?" he murmured, arching an eyebrow. Daniel was 35, the sharp-minded CEO of one of the country's most prestigious home design firms. He was used to penthouses, exclusive restaurants, curated introductions, not chipped fences and sagging porches. He had agreed to this experiment only because his assistant and closest friend, Ethan, had pushed for it for weeks. "Just once," Ethan had said. "A blind date. No names, no background, no expectations. You keep saying you want something real." Daniel had scoffed at first. Real was dangerous. Real was messy. Real had betrayed him before. His last relationship had ended with betrayal so sharp it still stung. She had loved the private jets, the champagne, the name. Not him. Not really. Since then, he had buried himself in work, surrounded by marble and glass, never letting anyone close enough to see past the CEO facade. But now here he was, standing in front of a house that looked like it belonged in one of his before projects. He approached the porch, the wood groaning beneath his steps. The silence was thick. No car in the driveway, no sound inside. "Probably a prank," he muttered. Still, he reached out and pressed the doorbell. Ding dong. Nothing. He waited a few seconds, then sighed and turned to leave. This had to be a joke. What was he thinking, coming here? But just as he stepped down onto the first creaky stair, he heard it. The slow creak of a door opening. He turned. The door had opened just a few inches. Then, slowly, it swung wider. Standing there were three little girls, triplets, around 6 years old. All of them wore the same pink dress, the fabric slightly wrinkled, one of them with a jelly stain on the front. Their curls bounced softly as they stepped forward, wide eyes staring up at him. Identical eyes, identical faces. Daniel blinked. Hi." None of them spoke. One of the girls held something in her small hand, a crumpled note, written in big, shaky letters with a purple crayon. She reached up and handed it to him. Daniel unfolded it. "Please don't leave. She's scared to see you because you're rich." He stared at the message, his heart giving an unexpected tug. He looked down again at the girls, who now stood in a perfect row on the porch. Their expressions were innocent, curious, not afraid, just hopeful. He was about to speak when one of them whispered, "Are you the man from the paper?" Daniel crouched down, careful not to startle them. I think so." "Where's your mom?" Another girl stepped forward. She pointed behind her, voice quiet. "She's crying." Daniel froze. Something in his chest shifted. This was no prank, no setup, no manipulation. This was something real, and he was not leaving. Daniel stepped into the house, guided by the soft patter of 3 sets of small feet. The scent hit him first, a mix of fresh paint, something sweet baking in the oven, and the faint earthy smell of wood. The interior was modest but full of life. The floorboards creaked softly under his steps, and the walls were half-painted, rollers and trays still on the drop cloths. Children's drawings were taped onto cabinets, and a mixing bowl sat lopsided on the kitchen counter. His eyes lifted. On a small platform near the front window, a young woman stood with her back to him. She was reaching up, carefully painting the trim along the ceiling line. Her pale blonde hair was pulled back in a loose half-up style, tied with a faded ribbon that looked like it had seen years of love. The sunlight streaming in through the window bathed her in gold, catching the small flecks of paint on her shirt and arms. She was barefoot, standing on the second rung of a wooden step ladder. The back of her shirt clung to her slightly arched spine, speckled with white paint. Her frame was slim, delicately built, fragile even. Daniel took a step forward, just as she turned. Their eyes met. She let out a small, startled gasp. "Who are you?" Startled, her hand jerked, and her foot caught on the edge of the ladder. Time slowed. Her body tipped backward, arms flailing, mouth open in shock. Without thinking, Daniel surged forward. He caught her mid-fall, arms cradling her easily, as the momentum carried them slightly off balance before he righted them both. She landed against his chest, trembling. Daniel held her for a beat longer than necessary. She was incredibly light, her ribs fragile beneath his arms. Her hair brushed his chin, the faint scent of orange and cedarwood lingering in the air between them. She caught her breath, cheeks flushed. I did not expect anyone here." He gently helped her stand on her own 2 feet. "I was invited," he said calmly, "but I admit, this isn't quite the restaurant I imagined." "No." Her eyes darted over him, wary but not unkind. She adjusted her hair with a quick hand and stepped back. "I thought it was just a joke," she said, voice low. "I didn't think anyone would actually come." Before either could say another word, the sound of footsteps thundered from the hallway. The 3 girls burst into the room, beaming. One of them pointed and shouted, "Mommy, he caught you like a superhero." Another added, "You fell like a princess, and he saved you." The third simply giggled, holding on to Daniel's pant leg like they had known each other forever. The young woman, Emily, he guessed, watched them with a mix of exasperation and surrender. Then, slowly, her eyes met Daniel's again, this time softer. Her voice was quiet but steady. "I guess you're really here." Daniel offered the faintest smile. "I am." And in that moment, standing in a half-painted room, the scent of cookies in the air, and a 6-year-old gripping his leg like a lifeline, Daniel Lawrence, who had planned to stay no more than 5 minutes, decided to stay a little longer. The kettle whistled softly from the stove. Emily moved with quiet ease, pouring hot water into 2 mismatched mugs before setting them on a small wooden table, the surface worn and peeling at the corners. "Tea?" she asked, not quite meeting his eyes. Daniel nodded and took a seat, the chair giving a small creak under his weight. The room was modest, but warm. Drawings in crayon were taped to the walls, smiling suns, stick figure families, hearts in every color. A few picture frames rested unevenly on a shelf, one cracked diagonally through the glass. The triplets sat on the sofa, their legs too short to touch the ground, feet swinging back and forth. They whispered to each other behind their hands, but their eyes never left Daniel. He lifted his mug, blew gently on the steam, and offered a small smile to Emily. She sat across from him, fingers wrapped around her cup, knuckles pale. "So," she said hesitantly, "what do you do?" Daniel hesitated, then kept his voice casual. "Interior design, freelance stuff mostly." She raised an eyebrow slightly but said nothing. Her eyes flicked to his watch, his shoes, his posture. Everything about him screamed, polished, practiced, successful. Not exactly the vibe of a struggling freelance designer. But she let it go. One of the girls suddenly hopped off the sofa and ran over, holding something wrapped in a napkin. "We made cookies. You should try one." Daniel leaned down, accepting it with a grin. "Thank you." He took a bite. It was a little uneven, slightly underbaked in the center, but sweet and full of effort. This tastes like it came from a downtown bakery." Emily let out a small laugh, the sound soft and unexpected. "I taught them from YouTube videos. We experiment a lot, usually with a fire extinguisher close by." "Well, you have a gift," he said genuinely. "All 3 of you." The compliment settled between them like sunlight through the window. They sipped their tea in silence for a moment. Then Daniel's voice dropped. Gentle. Can I ask you something? Emily looked up warily. Depends what it is. He chose his words carefully. Why were you afraid when you found out someone rich might show up? She didn't answer at first. Her thumb traced the rim of her mug. Then, quietly, because rich people leave. Daniel blinked. She continued, voice tight. I was in love once. He had money. Not like you, probably, but enough. We were going to start a family, and when I told him I was pregnant, her breath hitched. She shook her head. He said he wouldn't sign anything. Not a birth certificate, not a check, nothing. Told me I was on my own. Daniel sat very still. I had 3 babies coming, she whispered. 3. She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand, eyes glistening. And I did it. I worked. I painted walls. I delivered groceries. I did everything. And I promised myself I would never let someone like him near my girls again. She met his gaze then, fierce and aching. People like that, they always have somewhere else to be. Somewhere better. I can't risk that again. Daniel didn't speak. Not yet. Instead, he reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a neatly folded handkerchief. It was white linen, simple, with a single stitched letter in the corner. D. He stood, stepped toward her and placed it gently in her hand. No words, just the gesture. Emily stared at it, stunned. Then, slowly, she brought it to her cheek. Her voice was barely a whisper. Thank you. He sat back down, watching her with quiet respect. He did not try to fix it. He did not promise things he couldn't know. He just stayed. And in her tear-filled eyes, something small cracked open, just enough to let the light back in. The sun dipped lower outside the window, casting a golden hue across the living room. Emily wiped her hands on a dish towel and glanced toward Daniel, who was still seated at the kitchen table, sipping his tea in thoughtful silence. Would you like to stay for dinner? She asked. He looked up, surprised. I mean, it's just spaghetti and salad, she added quickly. Daniel gave a small smile. That sounds perfect. The triplets lit up like sparklers. Yay, dinner with a guest. Can we play the riddle game with him, Mommy? I bet he can't beat our puzzle. The girls grabbed Daniel's hands and tugged him into the living room. He followed with amused patience, letting them pull him toward a corner stacked with board games and crayon-covered flashcards. Emily returned to the kitchen, a gentle warmth spreading through her chest. Their laughter floated around the house like music. As she began boiling water and slicing tomatoes, a sudden thud made her freeze. One of the girls had bumped into the bookshelf. The frame tilted awkwardly to one side, a few books sliding off the shelves and hitting the floor with a loud clatter. I'm sorry, one of them squeaked. Emily hurried over. It's all right, baby. This shelf has been wobbly for weeks. But Daniel was already crouching beside it, inspecting the joints with practiced eyes. Actually, the wood's not bad, he murmured. It just needs new screws and a couple of stabilizers. He stood up, rolling back his sleeves. I've got a toolkit in the car. Before Emily could protest, he was gone. He returned moments later with a compact toolbox and knelt beside the shelf, sleeves rolled, focused, and calm. He worked with quiet precision, removing screws, replacing them, adjusting the legs until the frame stood straight again. Sweat glistened at his temples as he leaned in with the screwdriver, muscles flexing under his shirt. The girl sat cross-legged behind him, whispering and watching with big, sparkling eyes. He's like a builder prince, one of them said in awe. Another giggled and suddenly climbed onto Daniel's back. You're my horsey now. Daniel let out a small, surprised laugh. Oh, is this part of the game? You're a building horsey, she declared. He didn't flinch or brush her off. He just shifted slightly, balanced her weight, and kept working. Soon, her sister clambered on too, arms wrapped around his neck. Emily watched from the kitchen doorway, a lemon in one hand, a quiet storm in her chest. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She just looked at her girls, laughing freely, clinging to a man they had known for less than a day. At Daniel, calm and steady, not retreating, not annoyed, just there. Her eyes stung. It wasn't sadness. It was hope, unexpected, fragile and terrifying. Dinner was served under the warm glow of the single pendant light above the table. The plates were mismatched, the napkins slightly wrinkled, but the atmosphere buzzed with laughter and the clinking of forks. Daniel told stories from his childhood, building pillow forts with his cousins, nearly burning down the garage trying to make a treehouse. The girls leaned in, wide-eyed and giggling. They peppered him with questions, interrupting each other with endless curiosity. Emily watched them from across the table. Her walls were still there, but thinner now, transparent in places. When Daniel caught her gaze and smiled, she didn't look away. She smiled back. The morning sun streamed gently across the front porch, casting warm light over the sketchbook in Daniel's hand. He stood outside Emily's door, smiling softly to himself. After a night filled with laughter, games, and stories, he had spent the early hours drafting a little surprise. When Emily opened the door, still in her robe with sleep-softened eyes, he held out a rolled-up paper tied with string. "I thought, maybe your garden could use a little imagination," he said. Curious, she untied it and gasped. It was a detailed sketch of her front yard, reimagined with stepping stones, climbing vines, and a wooden bench shaded by a flowering arbor. There were spots marked out for the girls to plant their own tiny vegetables. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Daniel shrugged with a boyish grin. "Just a thank you. For dinner. And for letting me in." Soon the girls were gathered around the table, coloring in the sketch with markers, adding rainbows and unicorns between the flowers. Emily laughed more that morning than she had in weeks. She looked at Daniel like he was something unexpected, a man she could trust. But trust is a fragile thing. Daniel stepped outside to fetch a tool from his car. Just as he reached the trunk, a sleek black SUV pulled up behind him. Ethan climbed out, waving a thick folder in one hand. "Sorry, boss. Board needs your signature on the Spencer contract before noon. They're on standby." Daniel's stomach dropped. Ethan noticed too late. His voice carried. Emily stood in the doorway, frozen. "Boss?" she repeated. Daniel turned slowly. "Emily." Her face was unreadable. "You're not a freelance designer." He swallowed. "No. I was going to tell you. You lied." "I didn't lie. I just didn't tell you everything yet." She stepped back, as if the space between them wasn't wide enough. "So what was this? Huh? A project? A social experiment? Come see how the poor folks live?" Daniel flinched. "Of course not. You're just like him," she said, her voice trembling. "Charming, generous, and so rich. Rich enough to leave without thinking twice." The girls peeked out from behind her legs, wide-eyed and silent. Daniel took a step forward. "Emily, I never wanted to hurt you." She shook her head and reached for the doorknob. "You already did." Her hand tightened around it, knuckles white. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything you did for them, but don't come back." He stood there for a moment, wanting to speak, not knowing how. Then he turned and walked away, the sound of the door closing behind him echoing louder than it should have. Inside, Emily pressed her back against the door, eyes burning. One of the girls looked up at her, voice small. "Mommy, what did he do wrong?" Emily bent down, pulling them all into her arms. She could not answer, not without breaking. That night, two worlds lay quietly apart. Emily sat on the edge of her bed, the handkerchief he had given her days ago clutched in her hands. The soft white linen, the embroidered D in the corner, it now felt too heavy to hold. Miles away, Daniel sat in his car outside his office tower. The city lights blurred through the windshield. He gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles pale. Neither of them slept. Something fragile had begun to grow. And now, it felt shattered. Back at the motel, Daniel knocked hesitantly on the door. Emily answered, phone in one hand, fury in her eyes. "You said no one would know," she snapped. Daniel stepped back slightly. "I didn't tell anyone. I swear." "Then how the hell did they get my picture? My kids' faces?" He looked genuinely stunned. "I didn't call the press. Ethan didn't either." But Emily wasn't listening. She hurled her phone onto the floor, the screen cracking on impact. "This is exactly why I didn't want you in our lives. Everything with you becomes a headline." "Emily," he said quietly, "I don't care about headlines. I care about you." "Too late," she muttered, voice hoarse. She turned, retreating into the room. The door didn't slam, but it might as well have. The click of it shutting felt final. Daniel stood there for a long moment, staring at the faded number on the motel door. He didn't go back to his car right away. Instead, he walked to the edge of the lake, where the water lapped at the muddy shore, the reflection of the motel flickering in the ripples. He didn't know how to fix this. That night, Emily packed again. She didn't want the charity, didn't want pity, and most of all, she didn't want her girls to be a story in someone else's success narrative. When the girls asked why they were moving again, she just said, "We're going somewhere quieter." Daniel watched from a distance as the small truck rolled out before dawn, headlights fading into the misty morning. He didn't try to stop them. He just stood there in the cold, hand gripping the railing of his car, eyes wet, listening to a memory echo in his head. "Mr. Daniel, will you be our dad?" He wiped his face, but the ache didn't leave. Emily was gone. And this time, she had taken the light with her. Weeks passed. Emily thought the worst was over, until she found a letter taped to her door. Her hands trembled as she read the notice. The property was being reclaimed. The entire block had been bought by a development corporation. All tenants had 30 days to vacate. She rushed to the leasing office, heart pounding, hoping for an extension. The receptionist gave her a tight smile and a canned apology. No exceptions. That night, as rain hammered the roof, Emily sat cross-legged on the living room floor. Around her, cardboard boxes lay half-filled with their lives. Crayon drawings, hand-me-down clothes, kitchen tools she could never quite replace. The girls were asleep, curled under a blanket on the couch. Emily pulled them into her arms, pressing her face into their hair, breathing them in. Everything was slipping away again. Downtown, Daniel sat in his sleek corner office, staring at a floor plan he couldn't focus on. The city lights blinked beyond the window, but his mind was far from the skyline. He hadn't seen Emily in weeks, not since she told him to leave. "You're not welcome here," she had said. He had listened, but he couldn't forget. Ethan stepped in with a stack of reports. "Hey, the team's having trouble with that suburban rezoning. Apparently a lot of residents are protesting." Daniel barely glanced up. "Why?" Ethan skimmed his notes. "There's this single mom with 3 girls. They're being evicted. It's turning into a PR problem." Daniel froze. "What neighborhood?" Ethan named the street. Daniel was already standing. "Cancel my meetings." "Wait, Daniel, where are you?" But he was gone. It was still raining when Daniel arrived. Emily stood in the driveway, soaked to the bone, dragging a box toward a truck. The girls were wrapped in a quilt on the porch, fast asleep, huddled together like ducklings. Their small faces were flushed with cold. Daniel didn't say a word. He moved to his car, pulled out a tarp, and gently laid it over the open boxes. Then he held out an umbrella above her. She startled when she noticed him. "What are you doing here?" she asked, voice rough. Daniel didn't flinch. I didn't know this was happening. She scoffed. Of course you didn't. You just sign papers. You don't see the mess it leaves behind. He didn't argue. He just looked at her, the water dripping from his hair, his coat already soaked. Let me help, he said softly. Emily stared at him for a long moment, then turned away. He stayed anyway. Together with Ethan, Daniel arranged for a small lakeside motel, quiet, clean, safe. He paid in cash, left no name. That night, he stood in the shadows as Emily unlocked the door with the girls asleep in her arms. She never looked back. The next morning, the story broke. CEO Daniel Lawrence rescues single mother and 3 daughters after eviction. Emily stared in horror at the news article on her phone. Her face, her daughters, all there. She slammed the phone down and stormed outside. Daniel was waiting nearby, bringing fresh groceries. You said no one would know, she shouted. I didn't tell anyone, he said, caught off guard. Liar, she held up the phone. You wanted to be the hero. Rich man saves poor mom. Congratulations. I didn't do this for that. I didn't want this out. Then why is it everywhere? She snapped. Daniel's jaw clenched. I don't know, but I would have helped you whether anyone saw it or not. Emily's eyes filled with angry tears. Just stay away. She slammed the door. That night, she packed again. No motel, no headlines, just distance. As the moving truck rolled away under a moonless sky, Daniel followed in silence, headlights dim. Not too close, not too far. Through the rearview mirror, he watched the truck shrink into darkness, the taillights blinking like dying fireflies. He closed his eyes, gripping the steering wheel. In the quiet, a voice echoed in his mind. Mr. Daniel, can you be our dad? He swallowed hard, but the ache stayed. This wasn't just heartbreak. This was the feeling of losing something he never knew he needed, until it was already gone. The room was barely big enough for the 4 of them, but Emily had made it feel like home. The walls were bare, except for a few scribbled crayon drawings taped up by tiny hands. A portable heater buzzed quietly in the corner. Every evening, she would sit on the edge of the bed, watching her daughters sleep, a worn photo in her lap. Daniel, kneeling in the grass, arms wrapped around the girls, all of them laughing. She traced the corner of the picture with her thumb. The ache in her chest never really went away. By day, she painted murals at a local elementary school. It didn't pay much, but it paid. The girls spent their time at a daycare nearby, their shoes often muddy, their laughter still bright. They never asked about the old house anymore. But Emily did. Every night, in silence. Downtown, Daniel was a ghost in his own life. He stopped attending board dinners, ignored party invitations. His penthouse felt colder than ever. He buried himself in designs, blueprints, client meetings, anything to stay too busy to feel. But nothing worked. He missed them. All 4 of them. Then, one afternoon, an envelope arrived at Emily's door, handwritten, no stamp. She opened it slowly. The redevelopment has been paused. Your home is no longer part of the acquisition. You're welcome to return if you choose. There was no sender, no signature, just that single message. Emily stared at it, heart pounding. Coincidence? Maybe. But hope began to stir again. A week later, she held her daughter's hands as they turned onto the familiar street. Emily stopped in front of the old house. Her breath caught. It had been transformed. Not rebuilt, preserved. The porch was repainted in soft cream. The flowers by the front steps had bloomed again, tidy rows of marigolds and lavender. The crooked mailbox stood straight now, with their last names still etched in faded marker. She stepped forward slowly, her eyes drifting to the front wall, the one she had never finished painting. Now, a mural stretched across it, her and her daughters, standing under a deep night sky, stars glowing above them. The 3 girls held her hands, smiling. Her hair was down. She was smiling too. In the corner of the mural, a tiny signature, D. Emily pressed her hand to her chest. A neighbor stepped out from across the street. "You're back," she said with a warm smile. Emily nodded. "Did someone work on this place?" "Oh, a man came by most mornings, real early. Always had paint on his jeans. Quiet, but kind. Fixed up the porch, planted flowers, touched up the inside too, I think. Wouldn't say a word when we asked his name." Emily didn't have to guess. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her bag, a drawing her youngest had made just days ago. It showed a man with dark hair holding the three girls, their arms wrapped tightly around him. Below it, her daughter had written in big block letters, "Mur, Daniel." Emily sat down on the porch steps, the paper trembling in her hand. He never gave up. She had turned her back, shouted at him, walked away. But he had stayed, without needing thanks, without needing to be seen. She wiped at her eyes. "Girls," she said gently, "I think we need to say sorry to someone." Her oldest looked up. "You mean Mr. Daniel?" Emily nodded. The middle one slipped her hand into hers. "He's not mad, Mama." "No? No. He loves you." Emily smiled through the tears. "Yeah," she whispered. "I think I'm starting to believe that too." The glass doors of the corporate tower slid open with a hush as Emily stepped into the sleek marble lobby. Her white blouse clung to her from nerves more than heat. Heads turned. Whispers followed her as she walked past modern art and sharp suits. She had never been in a building like this. Ethan spotted her from across the room. His eyes widened, but then he smiled, knowingly, and gave a small nod. Without a word, he led her to the private elevator and pressed the top floor. On the 42nd level, the doors opened to a quiet office filled with light. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the city skyline. The late afternoon sun painted gold across the floor. Daniel stood by the window, back to her, hands in his pockets. His silhouette was still, tall, alone. Emily stepped in slowly. Her voice trembled, but her words were clear. "I didn't come to ask for anything," she said. "I came to thank you." He didn't turn. "And to ask," she continued, "if maybe there's still a chance." Daniel turned around. His eyes were red, tired, hopeful. "I never wanted anything," he said, voice rough, "except to know you're okay. That you're happy." Emily took a step closer. "I am," she whispered, "but only when you're with me." The office door creaked open again. All three girls peeked in from behind it, then rushed forward with delighted squeals. "Mr. Daniel," they shouted, throwing their arms around him. He dropped to one knee, laughing through tears as he caught them in a hug. "We came to find you," one said proudly. "Mom said it was time." Another held something in her hand, a small plastic ring, bright purple with a cracked jewel. "I found it in the sand," she said. "You can give it to Mommy, like in movies." Daniel looked up at Emily. No grand speech, no dramatic music, just eyes filled with love and a lifetime of promises in a single glance. She nodded, tears streaming, smiling brighter than she ever had. That evening, the porch glowed under fairy lights strung along the new white railing. The smell of spaghetti and garlic bread lingered in the air. Laughter echoed across the small yard. Emily wore a simple white dress. Her hair, loose and soft, was pinned back with a single pink rose. Daniel sat across from her, letting the girls braid ribbons into his hair, their giggles filling the air. No marble floors, no candlelit restaurants. Just wood, warm air, and love that needed no decoration. As the sun dipped behind the trees, casting golden rays across their mismatched plates and picnic-style dinner, Emily reached for Daniel's hand. They didn't need words. Sometimes, the joke we didn't believe in becomes the miracle we've always needed. Thank you for joining us on this unforgettable journey of love, healing, and second chances. If Daniel and Emily's story touched your heart, imagine the many more tales waiting to be discovered. Kindness, resilience, and love. Sometimes all it takes is a little faith and an open door. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Kindness and Love Tales for more heartwarming stories that remind us what truly matters. New episodes every week, because love, in all its forms, deserves to be told. Hit that bell so you never miss a moment of magic.